live on 15 Twitter accounts, live on 15 Facebook pages, YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Fountain app, LinkedIn, Instagram. And we encourage you, the viewer and listener, to ask questions, offer your perspective. The questions are already coming in. Judah, we are live on YouTube, which is great. Live on my personal Facebook page, which is great. Viewers and listeners, let us know your thoughts, and we will relay them live on air. Bob Shada, hello. Scott Thorpe, the commercial agent, hello. We got two TV stations and a newspaper and a radio station watching us now. If you guys have questions, we're happy to relay them live on air. We're looking good on my Facebook page, J-Dubs. I will confirm I Love CVille. You check LinkedIn. We are live on I Love CVille, which is good. Maybe I could encourage or elbow a friend of the program, Ned Galloway, on a statement today. We're going to celebrate Diantha McKeel and her fantastic service to Albemarle County, of course, and any elected officials can chime in as well. As I see a city councilor watching the program right now, a Nelson County supervisor watching the program, a Fluvanna County supervisor watching the program. Ray Cadell, we love when you watch the show. Founder of the Toy Lift, Tom Powell, is watching the show. Bob Shada, the vice mayor of Vivace and the mayor of Birdwood, watching the program. William McChesney on McIntyre Road, hello. J-Dubs, I think things are looking great, and the viewers and listeners are already asking questions. I love the interactive nature of the show. We can start the program when you're ready, Judah. Good Friday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and thank you kindly for joining us on Real Talk with Keith Smith. It's an absolute pleasure to connect with you guys through the I Love CVille network on a show that airs live on every social media platform possible. Today's program encourages you, the viewer and listener, to chime in and help shape the conversation. That's what makes the network the water cooler of Central Virginia. You can determine where we go. Keith Smith, the star of Real Talk with Keith Smith, is currently driving up the eastern seaboard. He's heading to Connecticut, where he's going to spend some time with his grandbabies and also on Sunday ride in a big-time bike race to raise money for charity. Keith Smith is a passionate cyclist and certainly a gentleman that loves to give back to communities, not just locally, but nationally as well. So Keith, we miss you, my friend. Have no fear, though. Ned Galloway and Diantha McKeel are here. Judah Wickhauer is behind the camera. If you could go to the studio camera and then welcome Diantha and Ned on a three-shot. First, we start with the dapper Ned Galloway. Look at the ensemble today, Diantha. He's looking quite sharp today.
He always looks
sharp. He
does
look sharp. Yeah, I have to give Ned Galloway props. Wow. He's always dressed well.
When you sit in Keith's chair, though, Keith is the one that always...
Keith is always looking sharp.
Always looking sharp. So I was like, oh, I'm sitting in Keith's chair today.
You got to do it, yeah.
Got to better put that... I didn't have, I don't wear the Vans, but I have... It's like, all right.
I think I do see an Albemarle County
got a little Albemarle County
logo there, today. So that's good.
I saw the same. Ned's also got a fresh haircut. Maybe we encourage him to make a special announcement as well. But first, Ned, I'll get out of your way here. Kind of give us your vision of what you are seeing for the show today.
Oh, well, Keith, as Keith has done in the past, I've been fortunate enough to sit in this chair a few other times. With Neil, and he always is gracious and says, "Let's, you get to choose how we want to do that." And I thought, you know what, Supervisor McKeel has been a great friend and long-serving colleague, both on the school board and the board of supervisors. And this is her final year of election. It'll be her 28th and final year. And I thought, what better thing to do than to sit down and look at, relative to the fact that this is a realtor and we talk housing and things on the show, but to look over the 28 years and think of how have things changed from your first year to the year now, and talk about stuff that's happened in the county. And I think that would be of interest to folks. So that's where I think we'll be. I'm sure some things will come up that we'll have to address.
Yep.
But this is more about, let's talk about, let's look backward perspective, and then how does that relate to the present, and then what Diantha thinks and sees coming in the future. So I mean, we'll take these in small bites. We won't do it all at one time.
Well, and I say to Ned often, we're partners in crime. We have been partners in crime for a long time. But I will stress that I'm not sure I remember what I did yesterday, Ned. So when you're talking about...
you've got a great memory. I'll say this, Jerry. In 2009, I got motivated to run for the school board. And I was sitting in the auditorium of Lane Auditorium, attending a school board meeting. And when you first run and nobody knows who you are, like who's this guy, whatever, a lot of times they just look at you from around the room. Well, at the time, school board member McKeel, Diantha came up to me at a break and introduced herself, asked who I was, and I remember that. That was our first introduction, initiated by you. And then I was a fixture in that auditorium for school board meetings for a long time until I finally won the race I had. But I always appreciated the fact that, of all the different people that were in that auditorium and feeling like a stranger, that Diantha made me feel welcome, and I've always appreciated that.
And I will just add that it's really important as people announce that they're running for a position, an elected position, that they attend meetings and get to know the concerns and what people are thinking and what's on the table and the issues. That's really important.
Wholeheartedly endorse that.
I would love to throw kind of the flip book of your service with Albemarle County to the viewers and listeners, because it's not just 28 years on the Board of Supervisors, it's also time on the school board here. So kind of give us that flip book of when you first chose to get civically engaged, what motivated you, what inspired you, where you were at your time of life then, and then kind of give us the chapters of your civic duty.
Yeah. Well, I was in my late 40s. I had been appointed to the Albemarle County Health Advisory Board, and I was interested in that work because I was a nurse, and there was still rampant smoking in the schools and on the school campuses, and so that was my involvement. And then the Jewett district was the last district to come on board with an elected supervisor, because we had a rolling cycle, and the current sitting supervisor, who was Karen Powell, many people will know Karen, called me and said, I am not interested in running for election. Why don't you run for my seat? And
this was school board.
This was school board now, right? 28 years ago, well, 28 years ago. And so I tossed my hat in the ring. But I think really it was a health issue. To answer your direct question, I was interested because I really thought that our schools should be smoke-free.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And actually, that's what happened. It took a while.
I also didn't know that it was the rolling. You're saying because school boards used to be appointed in the...
Yeah.
And that was...
Well, what was rolling was the supervisor, and Karen did not want to run. As the sitting supervisor, she'd been appointed, and she didn't want to run for re-election. Yeah.
So what motivated you to transition from school board to Board of Supervisors?
I think it was an opportunity. Karen was not running, and I saw it as an opportunity to serve the community. And I'll be honest, the other driving concern I had, I also taught school. So I was first a school teacher and then a nurse at UVA. I was very concerned about public education in this country, because I'd been watching for years the threat to public education and how people were, for lack of a better word, dissing public education, the lack of funding that was going into public education. So that was one of the other driver that I had for running for school board.
Well, I remember when I was elected in 2011 to be the at-large member, then I had the opportunity to serve on the school board with Diantha. And I remember the transition, and I remember being thrilled when you chose to run for the Board of Supervisors when Dennis Rooker.
And that was the same situation. Dennis called me and said, I'm not running for supervisor, so different board here. And he said, why don't you run for my seat? And I kept saying, no, I love education. And he called me, I don't know how many times he finally called me, and finally I just gave in. But I will say, let's go back to the school piece, because an interesting data point that people don't know, when I was elected 28 years ago to the school board, the state of Virginia was funding education at about 70%, a little over 70%. Today, they're funding at 30%. So if you think about that, so the localities localities in Virginia have had to step up into that vacuum to fund their public education. And you think about Albemarle County right now, government provides to the schools about 60% of their funding. Well, that's because, if you think about it, the large amount is because we've gone from over 70% of funding from the state to now 30% of funding from the state. Think about who you elect.
Yeah, every time and that takes your local dollars away from being able to be used somewhere else. And every time they do any sort of unfunded mandate down from the state, and recently in the last 4, 5, 6 years, the state will want to do a teacher raise, but they only give the raise to the SOQ positions.
Right.
So if you have a division and you have positions that aren't specifically those SOQ positions, like maybe you have a full-time school nurse instead of a half-time. Maybe you have in Albemarle, we like to have an assistant principal in every single building. That's not required.
Right. That's
so
right.
if you have a small school, it's based on population, then you can maybe have a part-time, if any. And what are you going to do? Not give them the raise?
Right.
But that comes out of your own pocket. So it seems like the state's funding it, but really they're doing a percentage on the dollar of what
That's
what
right.
they're supporting.
And that's part of what drives right now for us real estate tax rates, right?
Which has been in the news.
And if you think about it, the 4 cents that we just supported, that included even additional funding for schools over what our formula was because of the need. So, and it's another reason in Virginia, it's very frustrating in Virginia for me, because what happens is as the localities have to fund education, education is provided to students in Virginia by zip code, because Albemarle County has been able to step up to the plate. But if you go down to Southwest or South Side, they just don't have the money. So we are really funding education in Virginia by zip code. Hence, what I was concerned about 28 years ago came to fruition, and why I actually ran for school board the first time as a part of why I ran.
And at VACO, when we go to VACO, like the whole 1 cent sales tax piece that the folks around the state have been trying to get the General Assembly, and the governor's vetoed it now, twice?
Twice, yep.
When you go to VACO, because a lot of times when you're in politics, you're thinking, are Republicans, Democrats, that sort of thing. Oh, well, only certain members think
and
that.
And VACO is Virginia
Association of Counties.
Yeah.
But when we go down there, it doesn't matter what the politics of a school board is, or a board of supervisors is. They all are interested in having this 1 cent sales tax piece because of this reason, because things have underfunded for so long. And it's like, give us the ability, one, to make the decision so the voters can vote on it, because it must be done by referendum first. And then if your community supports it, then we should have it as a tool.
And yet, what we hear from the governor's office is, we're not going to even give you permission to ask your voters
to have a vote.
to have a vote.
Right. So to put in perspective what they're talking about, there's some talk, and it's been going on for a while, and then we'll get to the questions that are coming in, that an additional 1 cent of sales tax could be allocated directly to schools. And localities are asking, because it's a Dillon Rule state, localities are asking to have the ability to have their citizens vote to see if they want to do this.
But it's not operational for schools. It is construction for capital.
Right.
Because many of the schools in Virginia are 50 years and older.
Of course, of course. And the governor right now has disallowed that twice. And, some folks have said this would be an across-aisle topic where it would unify Democrats and Republicans alike, because we're doing it on behalf of schools. And I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. Chris Fairchild's watching the program, Fluvanna County Supervisor. We love when Chris watches the show.
Chris.
You got 2 on council and 2 on Nelson County's Board of Supervisors watching right now. The similarities with you guys, and on paper, are very tangible. School board, right?
Yeah.
Then to supervisors. Can we say pursuing another term? Can I say that?
I will officially tell you now I'm running for re-election.
Okay.
I have dodged that question. It's not a secret, I don't think, at this point, but I've not done an official announcement.
We should have done a drum roll.
We should. Why don't we take a moment here? Ned Galloway, where you want to make a statement here?
I'm simply stating that this will be my run for a 3rd term for the Rio District seat. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope the voters of the district will give me that opportunity to serve again. Still got plenty of things I'd like to do on my to-do list as a supervisor, but at this point, I've attended a candidate forum as a candidate. I've said that I've just not done any sort of big press release or some of the stuff you do to roll it out. But you know what? This is a great place to be able to announce officially that I am running for re-election.
Okay.
And after all these years, you're going to miss me.
I am going to miss Diantha. So Diantha, the beauty of Supervisor McKeel, this is a quick little tangent, is that, everybody presumes, since we are our current board of supervisors of one party, that we're just going to agree on everything. Now, Diantha and I have agreed on a lot of things over the years, but when we haven't, we've always remained an ability to be able to say, and Diantha, to her credit, boy, direct, there's no guessing with Supervisor McKeel. You know where she's at, you know what she thinks, and she understands that when she talks directly to people, that behind that is, being clear is kind. There's nothing you can do in not doing anything but being direct. It's not kind to do to people. So when Supervisor McKeel and I, though, when we do disagree on issues, you have to remain, we always have retained that respect and for one another, and be able to just talk it through and be like, all right, well, then we agree to disagree. We can't get there. But in it, it stood out. I mean, it's been on the supervisors and the school board. I think we've had times where we've disagreed on different issues. But I think people local officials, regardless of their party right now, and I think this is true around Virginia. A lot of other boards are the opposite, right? They're all Republican. But most understand that, look, when you disagree, you should do it in a way where you're not creating bad feelings amongst everybody. Like, I see that in our surrounding counties. It's like, don't get into this where you're taking it where clearly the national politics, where they stand, and then even some level at the state. But you just can't do that. That's not good for anybody.
And I would jump in. Congratulations on your announcement.
Absolutely.
Big announcement.
And I would jump in right now, and this is a little tangent on my part, but one of the great, where we are right now with the city and the county and the university is one of the best places that I remember from my 28 years. We have now a city manager and a county executive who are working together, talking, and we have the president at the University of Virginia with Jim Ryan, and those three individuals meet every 60 days, and they talk about issues, they figure out what is best for our entire community, right? Not just the city or the county or the university. And that is a sea change from where we were 28 years ago when I was first elected. So I just want to send a shout out to Sam and Jeff and Jim because this is really important for people to realize. I think that I hear all the time, why don't you all ever talk to each other? Well, not only do the boards talk to each other, in Albemarle County, the chair and the vice chair meet monthly with the mayor and vice mayor. So we're all talking and working together much more than we ever used to, and I think that it's worthy of the community understanding that.
Put in perspective what it was like 28 years ago.
Oh, well, I used to say to people when I was on the school board and early on the board of supervisors, the hardest thing that I do is trying to work with the city and the county. I'm not kidding, I'm sorry, city and the university. Because, it's so easy to be in silos. Silos happen. And I will say, and this is me being very honest, one of the problems that I had, especially on the school board, was that because the city is all at large, when you're elected to a district or an area, you have a responsibility to that area, and you get to know those folks in your area. When everybody represents everybody, there's less accountability. And I'm not saying that the city is not accountable. I'm just saying that the process, the structure is different. And so when I was on the school board, my neighborhoods would be split by the city, and the city was over here on one side of the road, and I had a representation on the other side. And it was hard to get the attention from someone from the city to meet with me to have a joint. Do you see where I'm
absolutely.
going?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
So
And I think it's also fair to say that, and this is what I sensed when we had our overlap on the school board. I think over the years, Supervisor McKeel has always tried to get local government and the school division
Yes,
to
together.
work better. It's in same
Right.
fashion of what you're talking about
Right. Right.
with the city and UVA, because that was not always
No,
the case.
we had silos. So it's those silos. When I was at the university, there were silos within the university. There were silos between county schools and county government. Matter of fact, when we first hired Jeff Richardson, Jeff laughs and says that one of the first things you said to me, Diantha, was we need to figure out how to work better with the schools. Because and that's one of the, I guess, to get back to what Ned was talking about earlier, that's one of the things that I am the proudest of, is that I have really worked to break down walls and get people out of silos, whether it's getting the chamber together with Albemarle County Public Schools over workforce development, or school system and county government together, or city and county together. You know, I really, to just network and get people together, because you really get a lot more done if you're sitting around a table talking or over lunch.
Right, right.
Yeah.
You got a lot of comments coming in. I want to highlight friend of the program, Donna Price, former supervisor, watching the show. And since I saw that Donna was watching the show, it got me thinking of something that she said while sitting in the chair Ned's sitting in right now. Rivanna Futures, Rivanna Station, is going to be the most significant driver of the economy in Albemarle County history, save the University of Virginia. The University of Virginia's founding and significance here in Albemarle County. Put in perspective what you guys did, Diantha and Ned, buying land in the northern aspect of Albemarle County to strengthen or to put a foothold for the government sector, the defense sector in Albemarle, and why that was so important for Albemarle County moving forward.
I'll just frame a little bit and then you can take
Sure.
over. So I don't think people realize that obviously the University of Virginia is the largest employer in our community. The Department of Defense is the second largest.
$1.3 billion
I was
impact.
just going to say, they have 3,000 employees and $1.3 billion. Now, that's not just to the investment or returns to the city and the county. That's the region. But that is an incredible footprint and critical to our economy, right? And so you want to
Yeah, and I
piggyback here?
I had somebody recently, because I've been, economic development was something that I know before I was on the supervisors, that folks like Supervisor McKeel were starting to push, and why it's important for the county. But we're not even 10 years in really on a real strong economic development approach. But when you think of what our project enables states, we're interested in homegrown businesses and keeping them and trying to do things to be able to let them stay here. So I've had some folks who frankly are uncomfortable, like, well, I don't know if I'd pick the defense industry or the military. And I'm like, well, look, they were here. So it wasn't like we could pick who's going to start or set up shop here. But we have to recognize whether it's NGIC, the National Ground Intelligence Center, whether it's the Defense Department, whether it's a small homegrown restaurant that has started out on Rio Road. We have to do the things, I think, to help them be successful and maintain, and we want to keep them here because it's so important to our local economy. But, with the decision to buy 462 acres, what's your take on the assessment of property value in Albemarle County? Pretty good investment
Absolutely.
to own property in Albemarle?
Absolutely, yeah.
So there was a low risk in buying, very good purpose to want to retain Rivanna Station. The purchase of the property was done in a way that even if the worst case happened and the Rivanna Station closes or they leave, we still own that property, and then we could start thinking about other things that we could do for the public good, or if we decided to get out of the property, we probably wouldn't lose in that situation. So the risk was really not that high when you think of it in those terms. And I think the thing that resonates big time through our town halls that we did during the budget cycle this year, especially with the fact that our property values have skyrocketed over the last 3 years, especially since we now have voted on a tax rate increase. We have to, and we've already started to talk about it in our board meetings, figure out how to diversify where we quit hitting that property tax so hard.
Right.
And if we're not doing leaning forward into economic development projects to raise that commercial tax revenue, which is sitting at what, like 11%?
It's 11%, which is just when I was elected to the Board of Supervisors, Ned, in 13, it was at about 17%, and we've fallen to 11%.
Put in perspective commercial tax revenue for the viewers and listeners.
Okay.
So, I mean, you have what comes from the property tax and the other piece accounts for about 70% of our revenues coming in. And then now it's 11%.
For commercial.
For commercial.
Right.
And in our rural area, the ag economy is only about 15%. Both of those used to be higher.
Yes.
And so what that has meant as commercial has dropped and as the agricultural piece, coming from the rural area has dropped, what had to go up?
You've had to tax residential rooftops more.
That's right.
Yeah.
And a healthy economy, you can talk to economists and everybody will give you kind of a different number, but a healthy economy, we should have at least a minimum of about 20% commercial base, right? And many will tell you 25 to 30. But we're at 11, and when I was elected, we were at 17, and I was saying then we've got to get it to 30.
In doing those projects around Ravenna Station, Home Depot is the best example. I've said that on this show before. The tax, we're not collecting any revenue from that site, really, a couple $100,000 compared to what it used to be in the past.
Right.
Once Home Depot's up and running, we're going to see more commercial revenue or coming in from a commercial sector. And the importance of that, which I'm thrilled our county executive always reminds us of, is that when you build a residential unit, the demand on services is about 3 times what it is when you set up a retail operation or a business entity.
Right.
Because if Home Depot sets up, you're not sending anybody to school because of Home Depot being there. Now, there's other demands on the service. It does have a hit, but it is literally, I think it's 3 times the cost.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
If you get down to like a per dollar basis on commercial versus what residential will do. But if we do not get really vigorous and rigorous in our economic development approach, then we're going to keep having to hit property, and that's just not sustainable.
Because our population is growing and putting more demand on our services, and if you think about it, Jeff Richardson talks about this a lot, but heads in beds at night, but we also have all of these people driving in during the daytime that are not heads in beds at night, but they put demand on our services. For example, if you're coming in to work is what I'm basically talking about. Most people that are coming in, and the tourism. Sometimes they need fire and rescue, sometimes they need police. I mean, those are also challenging our services and our need to fund services.
And it's not just on a special weekend like UVA graduation.
But that certainly is true too.
This is on a regular, daily basis.
Right. And then you add to that the challenges that we're having right now with needing to provide services during events, and I don't mean just UVA events, but climate events, floods.
And I think it's worth, we were devastated this week.
Fires.
We see what happens with flood, with the loss of Jordan Sims. That was
12-year-old boy.
12-year-old boy.
Right. And
heart goes out to their family. Good grief.
Terrible situation. And then just, a year and a half ago, we had a fire that we didn't have our firemen, that fire was large enough that our fire crews couldn't handle it. We had to reach out to surrounding counties for help. And certainly no criticism of them. It's just the reality of what is happening these days with events.
Which is where a portion of the 4-cent real estate tax rate increase, it was allocated to improving fire and rescue and support personnel. I'll just, for the sake of a talk show here, I'm sure you guys heard some of the pushback of increasing the tax rate and how that could just take our family. We know the groceries are higher, the assessments on homes are higher, everything's more expensive now. How do you navigate, Diantha and Ned, that walk of knowing a tax rate increase is going to be tough, but knowing the county absolutely needs it? Just walk us through kind of your thinking there.
Well, when I mentioned earlier how Supervisor McKeel is always a very direct speaker of folks. In the town hall, I was saying this to folks. I know this. I'm not going to pretend like your property bills have not gone up and we've collected more tax revenue to the tune of 7 or 8% 3 years ago, average of 13% 2 years ago, another hit of 5, but really for residential it was more like an average of 7 or 8%. And then, yes, we asked for an additional 4 cents. But what we have, the choice was we do that and ask our voters and then explain why we're doing it, or not do it, and then the decision would have been, all right, we don't put, we've hired 57 firefighters on SAFER grants to allow us to get into that, to spread the cost out over years. So one of the decisions could have been, all right, well, we give up those 57 paid fire positions, and the volunteer stations are going to not have, because that's why those 57 really came into play. We've hired 97 firefighters since 2021, but 57 of them were really about the demand of the volunteer stations coming in and going, we don't have the volunteer personnel to be able to provide adequate service to the rural area. So what's the decision? You put in paid professional fire staff to try to fill the gap, or you don't. And I don't think don't is the right answer. So I've been telling folks, we need to do this. I think police has been understaffed forever. And I'm just more and more have become more concerned over 12 and 18 months, especially with how just a couple of little things, I don't mean to undermine them, but we all think of big events as putting a strain on a system. But what we're having are a handful of events putting a strain on a system. And if we don't get ahead of that, that can be problematic from a public safety standpoint. And I think when you at least I felt this in the town halls, when the taxpayers that were there and that was explained, they might not like it, but they're at least saying, all right, well, I at least understand the rationale behind why you're hitting the tax.
I understand the rationale, and it's totally what you just said. I don't like it, but I understand the rationale of why you had to do it. And it really puts, and Diana, I'll get out of your way here, but it really puts the emphasis on the need to drive economic development.
Right.
Which is the points that you guys have really been making. And I see the economic opportunity there, say the Paul Manning Biotech Institute that's coming, thousands of jobs indirectly or directly tied there, the data science school, your commitment to Rivanna Station, I think was a brilliant move by you guys. And I think when we reflect in history, the board, Donna, Diantha, Ned, the board during the Rivanna Station, you guys are going to get credit from a legacy standpoint of having a noteworthy impact in Albemarle County, keeping the defense sector here. But I also am concerned, and I think, and I'll get out of your way here, I think this is going to be one of the drivers of the Jack Jewett race, your district, where you have two Democrats going toe-to-toe. I think this race is going to be determined by taxes. And I think the candidates will be determined, the winning candidate, and how voters decide is how Sally Duncan, or is it Dave Shreve? Dave Shreve, their stance on taxes this election year, I think, is going to determine this race. That's just one man's take here. You had something you want to say here.
I was just going to say, getting back to what we were talking about, how fire and rescue, police, safety, all that plays into our need to, again, economic development. Businesses don't go to a community that's not safe. So we have to have a safe community and for economic development to really happen. And I've had people say, well, I've never used the fire department in the whole time I've been in this community, but you do. One little tidbit is that because we have such a robust fire protection in this area and we maintain it, everyone in this community gets a break on their fire insurance. So don't forget that, because that is, while it doesn't offset it completely, it is a good thing to keep in mind.
A respectful devil's advocate for you.
Yeah.
With economic development, the new businesses that come to Albemarle County also need workers to staff their businesses.
That's right.
And there's some that are in ownership of businesses in Albemarle County that are screaming at the top of their lungs saying, we can't find help. And the reason we can't find help for folks to staff our businesses is because they can't afford to live in Albemarle County anymore. So just a respectful devil's advocate for you.
Well, and I'll just respond back, and it's a little bit different from the way you're saying it, but one of the things that we're working really hard, Albemarle County Public Schools right now, is that they're working on career pathways, local career pathways to help train students, pathways for students where they could get jobs where they don't have to go to college for the job, or PVCC, and that is what Center 2 is all about it with Albemarle County Public Schools. But just to follow up with that, many of our young people graduate from our high schools and leave here to take jobs in Richmond and in Lynchburg. We need to keep them here for exactly for what you're talking about.
And I would say, based just to piggyback on that, is that if this is a topic of interest, then everybody should be paying attention to our board meeting this coming Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because we've got a jam-packed work session that's going to have the consultant report back on the update to Project Enable, which is our economic development strategic plan. We're going to have some conversation around Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because to your point, it's not just that when you said they can't afford to live here, we have a housing issue that we have to figure out, and that is an economic development issue, understood. We're going to have some conversation around data centers and what that could mean from a revenue perspective to it. And then we're also going to have and get into the report that shows what we talked about earlier about what the demand is on services, residential versus these other things. And those 4 topics.
Right.
Now, you could silo those as economic development, housing, I guess services-based conversation, or you could say, all right, these are all tied together, and let's jump in and figure this out, because we do understand the importance of, if the housing's not there for the workforce that is needed, then the companies won't want to set up shop here for that reason. That is not lost on this board.
Right.
Comments are coming in. We'll highlight some of them. We'll highlight some of the viewers and listeners. Conan Owen is watching, the owner of Sir Speedy. David Riddick watching the program. Someone from your district, Carol Thorpe of Jack Jewett District is watching.
Hey, Carol.
Michael Guthrie watching the program. Stephanie Wells Rhodes watching the program. Logan Wells Claylow. Let us know your thoughts, viewers and listeners. This is a fair question. Jerry, could you relay to the board what economic development looks like for them for all classes of people?
Well, here's
what they mean. Go ahead.
Yeah, the way I respond to that, because it's not when Ravenna Futures was first done and it was announced publicly and we had some conversation about it. I remember in one of the board meetings I said, well, let's make sure that doesn't suck all the oxygen out of the room. We still have other economic development activities that we have to focus on, and I think that's what I call out what we're going to be talking about Wednesday. I've already given some feedback because we've had some. I mean, it's so much content. Sometimes we'll do 2x2s with the staff to get a little bit more in depth with it. I know those have occurred, and workforce development, but also doing the clarion call to folks to partner to provide skills that we hear employers saying they need. Not some Afton Scientific. Tom Thorpe, when he denounced his expansion, I'm pretty sure he did this on that day. He was like, or it was in the Go Region 9 economic development thing I'm on. As an employer, he knows he's going to have to train the people coming in the door. There's nowhere that's going to give them the skill and the training they need to be able to do what he needs his labor force to do. What he needs is them to be prepped to be good employees. And all the soft skills that we hear talk about. So I love career pathways. I think we should focus on that from a workforce development standpoint, but we also have to pull back and go, doesn't really matter what field you're going into, doesn't really matter what level of the workforce, whether it's, base minimum wage type job up to the highest wage or salary or commission that you can think of. If you do not have the soft skills to know how to work with other people, communicate, interview to get the job, understand the responsibility of showing up on time. I mean, you would think these are all basics, right? This isn't necessarily taught anywhere. And in the last 2 years of sitting in economic development in the regional pieces, and this isn't I'm not poking UVA, PVCC, or our own public school division. I hear this at the VACO, at the Virginia level, and the national level. Employers keep pointing at the institutions of education and saying, but you're not prepping them in these areas.
Right. And I would say that we need parents' help with that as well. I would add that, right? Because parents are their children's first teacher. And if they're not getting concerned when the children are going to school late every morning, what does that, make sure your kids really understand that it's important to get to school on time, just like it's important to get to work on time. That's role modeling good behavior, right? And behavior that will play out in your working world,
Now, to give a little bit more of a specific answer to the question, Home Depot is another good example here.
100 workers, 100 new jobs,
100
right?
new jobs. Yeah. And, the type of job that will be coming in the biotech industry and some of the things when Manning Institute and North Fork and those things come online are going to be across the spectrum. But right there, Home Depot, we did a tax abatement for them. to help with some remediation of what they found when they did the demo of the old Sears building.
Sears, yeah.
We got a nice piece of property back where we're going to realign Hillsdale Drive, so it'll take the cost down on that. But it forced them to come online by December 24th of this year, and they're already. I mean, they're clicking. I think they're going to.
They have a
open.
sign up that says July.
So I think
There's a
Yeah,
July.
they've moved it up. Yeah,
so
that's right.
when we incentivized them to do that, and then they committed to it, they went right on, and that means that it's not just about we can go buy our home supplies, our DIY stuff faster. Okay. It means those employers they're going to be able to hire all those employees and get them up and running sooner rather than later, and that's what I meant by don't let this big future project that's going to take a couple decades to really realize outweigh and take the oxygen away from making sure we're doing the ground level economic development things like a Home Depot as well.
Right. And businesses that hire a variety of people with a variety of skills, right?
Well, and that was your district. I think that was another a smart move by you guys. Not just the taking Fashion Square Mall, which was a ghost town, and revitalizing it as Home Depot, which should uptick that tax revenue that comes from the commercial line. Not just the 100 jobs, but that's a critical gateway, Albemarle County gateway, that Rio Road, Rio District into Albemarle County. And on top of that, the piece where there's redevelopment of the old Red Lobster site, I thought was genius to be included as well. That was a smart move. To the viewers' comments, and they're coming in really quickly now that we've opened the floodgates here. To the viewers' comments.
Pull up your pants.
Yeah. I think there's a lot. We're not going to be able to get to all these guys. To the viewers' comment, and you touched on it, the concern is that the jobs that are coming to Albemarle County are extremely white collar. And the jobs that are coming into Albemarle County may gentrify the county even more. I think that was what the viewer was asking with the comment.
I could understand that concern for sure. And a lot of economic development activity, in my opinion, the last few years, is always focused on entrepreneurs and the person starting the business. But at the end of the day, the type of work, especially in this biotech field, I mean, we're not going to see the manufacturing type of jobs that we used to see. I don't. Maybe I will admit it if I'm wrong, that the whole point of tariffs is they're going to bring back a historical manufacturing class that used to exist in this country that's going to bring it back into fruition. I think what is going to happen is that manufacturing turns into, when you look at an Afton Scientific, that's a manufacturing type of job. And those are not white collar jobs. They're strong wage paying. They're beyond minimum wage. But they're not the person sitting in the office doing financial services and helping folks figure out how to profit from their investments. These are folks that are going to be there doing physical things to create medicines and do things that they're, whether it's tools or the actual the medicine, I guess is how I would say that.
That's right.
And I think that's going to be the case with some of those different types of things that come up. I mean, we have other little small level manufacturing or light industrial things that are like that. That should prompt with the building. I mean, we haven't had a recent housing study to see how housing development and all the contractors. I mean, there's a lot of employees in the contractor that it takes to build a home or to build an apartment building. That should be able to continue. Those are not white collar type jobs.
People need to realize that these businesses hire a variety, right? And that's what we want.
Sure.
And that's one of the strengths of looking at workforce development. I hate to keep going back to that, but for example, we don't have enough. One of the most common complaints that we hear from our employees when we hire new employees is, I can't find a dentist. Well, the reason that we have a problem with folks finding a dentist is because there's a lack of dental hygienists. And so we're working right now. We have a group that's working to get through the Center 2, who's looking at the dental hygienist program, and PVCC to create a track. And you can be a technician, you can be a hygienist, or you can go on and be a dentist. But that's a good example of how the dentists need technicians that are not college educated, right? But they train them themselves to do the work. And then there's a hygienist level that is really highly paid, and then of course dentistry. So that gives you an example of just in a medical office, the variety. Plus then you, of course, you have the receptionist and those other jobs as well. But
This question's come in from Earleysville from Vanessa Parkhill. What steps does the Board of Supervisors take to reduce costs and pass savings on to taxpayers? The taxes are going to be such a huge piece of this election. So she's asking that question from Earleysville as a homeowner and as a small business owner.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just simply going to point out our SPEAR report.
Yeah.
People, we produced this year a SPEAR report, which actually lays out the reductions that we have made and how we've gone through. We charged Jeff Richardson, our county executive and staff, to look at through the lens of reductions. And so we certainly have put out a whole report. It's called SPEAR, S-P-E-A-R, that talks about how we've done that. And we actually have less positions this year, even with the addition of our police officers and the police officers that are in the budget. We have, it's less positions this year than we had last year. And you can take it from there.
No, it's 11. Without the addition of the police officers, it would have been about 11 and a half positions that were now gone in there because of re-engineering and looking at what we've called business optimization over the last handful of years in the county. So at the tax rate increase is going to allow us to put 6 officers onto the force. But even with that 6, we've still reduced down 5.5 FTEs. An average cost, I asked this question during the budget season, because you have to think of salaries and benefits, so what it hits. So one FTE in our county on average, so this isn't your bottom person, this isn't our top people, this is kind of an average place, it's about $150,000 per FTE. So those 5.5 is on the tune of, I think this year it was around $800,000 was the savings from that. Now, 4 cents allowed us to put, collect another 13, 14 million. So when you're like, well, I saved $1 million here, but that means we didn't have to raise the tax rate 4.5 cents because of those positions and the savings that those positions brought us. Now, I have said in the town hall meetings that if any individual, because it's obvious, and I think it is a question that is valid to ask, are you being efficient enough with the revenue you're receiving? And where the story is told is in the budget book. And I'm happy to sit down with anyone on a one-on-one basis with the group and go, okay, let's look through here. And I'll be open-minded for you to say, well, what about this? And then I'll speak to the rationale of why that's there and what happens if it's not. And then we'll discuss whether it's important or not.
And just to say that our systems in Albemarle County were so antiquated. We were operating, and again, siloed, right? And they were at the end of their lifespan. The companies were not even supporting them anymore. So we have spent, over the last few years, since Jeff came especially and started looking at this, upgrades to our systems. And of course, as we're improving our technology systems, we're needing fewer people. Now, that's a double-edged sword, too.
Sure.
But we're needing fewer people, so we're spending money on technology and upgrading our systems, but at the same time, we're looking at how those systems work for us, and we don't need as many people, right?
Dan Pettit watching the program. Viewers and listeners, the comments are coming in very quickly now. This is a great one for Supervisor McKeel. This has come in for her specifically. You're sponsoring a candidate forum with the 2 Jack Jewett candidates. Can she offer a take of what she thinks of the candidates and both platforms, what she thinks of the platforms?
I think I'm going to wait until that forum is next Wednesday.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I'm sponsoring that forum is because the candidates are so very different. Very different.
They're both Democrats, but they're very different.
They come at things very differently. I would encourage folks to look at Dave Shreve right now is working for a think tank. He's working from home from a think tank. I would encourage them to look at Dave's the think tank that he is an employee for. I think that is very enlightening into how what his beliefs are, right? Sally, on the other hand, is a teacher and has a website, and of course they both have websites. But I just think it's really interesting to look at professions and what the professions for the folks. So I would encourage folks to look at Dave's the website that represents Dave's think tank. Having said that, The forum will be is open to the public, but of course we're also going to podcast it and put it on YouTube, so it'll be available to people because I think there's going to be a lot of interest. Not sure we can get everybody into the media center at Journey Middle School, but anyway, we will podcast it and drop it onto YouTube. But I think that will be very informative for the public, and that was what I was trying to do. The reason I'm sponsoring it is to give my community an opportunity to ask questions and listen to the candidates.
Yeah. And I think Diantha smartly, a brilliant idea, first off, to be able to do this as an outgoing supervisor. I don't know that that's ever been done before, so kudos to you for that. But having, it's Neil and Jane Foy, Neil Williamson and Jane Foy?
And so I went to Neil Williamson, and I said, Neil, the candidates are very different. And I said, I have some leftover money from my campaigns over the years, and this is a good way to spend that money. And I said, so I want, Neil, would you do all the back end work, or the front end work, however you want to call it, and I'll just write you a check? And he said, I love that. He said, I like that. So we have Neil Williamson, right, and then Jane Foy, who is a really good friend of mine, and most people in the community remember Jane from
the morning show,
from WINA morning show,
right?
And she's a good friend, so she stepped up to the plate for me and said she'd be happy to help Neil moderate. So we have Neil and Jane,
but two very informed individuals who know the history and will be able to come up. I think those candidates better be ready because those two folks are going to be able to ask good questions of them.
Yeah. But I think it's important that people just do their due diligence as well.
Sure. It's interesting because they're already positioning themselves and their platforms with how they're interacting with media or online. Miss Duncan, as you said, is a teacher. She's very much emphasizing that she's a renter in her platform points. She rents in Earlysville.
Right.
And her husband works for Charlottesville City Hall, and Dave Shreve, as you've highlighted, is a senior economist with the Center for the Advancement of Steady State Economy.
Right.
So you've encouraged folks to check out his employer there. I'm curious.
His website for that. Yeah. And I will say, Dave would correct you, I think, in all fairness. Dave is an economic historian.
Economic historian.
Okay. He would correct you.
Okay. Yeah. Economic historian. Just going by his LinkedIn there. And I'll throw this to you here. The Jack Jewett district, the board right now is in a very interesting place. I think you're starting to see a political tide potentially turn. You have Mike Pruitt in the Scottsville district, who's unabashed in his housing advocacy. He's a housing champion. I think that's safe to say, right?
Sure.
We would all agree with
that.
Sure.
He ran as that was part of his platform.
That was his platform. You have Ms. Duncan, who is unabashed in her housing advocacy, density, potentially more taxes for that density. I think that would be probably safe to say. You have Supervisor Galloway here, who I've watched over the last few years understand the value of housing locally. To the point where you think perhaps more density should be in the mix. You have Supervisor Malik, who some would say, and we have evidence historically, that maybe the density of housing is not her first priority. I think that's safe to say. Supervisor Andrews, who's on his way out, follows the ideology of Supervisor Malik. B. Lepisto currently, I think, is on that side of the fence as well. So we have this board, this tide that's changing, that if the cards fall the right way, you could have a more pro-housing board than maybe I've seen in my 25 years of Albemarle County.
Well, I would just add that we're really struggling with housing right now. So that's why this has happened now, is because of the lack of housing that we have in this community.
Especially the affordable.
And when we say affordable, what we're talking about is teachers, police officers,
frontline workers.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. That's exactly. And we need those folks to be able to live in our community.
Now, I'll throw this to you. And we've been covering, for example, the development that's coming, the multifamily development, Old Ivy residents. We've covered on the I Love CVille network very closely. And some folks have said that the housing that is coming, this multifamily luxury apartment housing, is not necessarily the housing we need that would breed that affordability. And then in covering it with the I Love CVille network, we also highlighted that this was all happening while VDOT was reimagining or renovating the Old Ivy Road, which was tough
Yeah.
So may I throw a lot of this to you, Ned, and curious what's kind of going on in your head there?
Quickly, though,
Yeah.
I just participated in the groundbreaking for the Gray Stars Old Abbey Road, that Old Abbey
525 units.
And they are a mix. There's affordable housing there, and they are a mix of townhomes. So to call them luxury community is really not, in my viewpoint, accurate. There is a real mix.
Right.
There'll be single family residences, there are townhomes, there are apartments, and that is the first development in my district, in that area, on that side of town, that will provide housing for what I think of as the University of Virginia employees. It's on that particular side of town, which is a great location for them. We do not have it. Everything else on that side of town is $1 million and more. So this is a great development. And I will add laughingly that UTS, the University Transit System, just purchased 2 small buses, which will go under those 2 railroad bridges to pick up employees to take them. That's been a barrier on that road for a long time, or those railroad bridges. So
Yeah.
we're really excited about that.
35 acres, Ned, 525 units, a mix, Diantha is right, of apartments, townhomes, and standalone houses.
Yes.
Interestingly, it's a build-for-rent community.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Not a build-to-own.
Oh, that's right.
Right.
And if I misspoke about that, but it
No,
is.
no, you didn't misspeak.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is they have proffered the Rivanna trails. There's green space over there. It's not going to be all just asphalt, right? Asphalt. But lots of and they're actually building more trails on their property other than just the Rivanna, which they have promised to take. It is, I hope, going to be a model of what a really wonderful community could be. Now, would I like to see a little bit more of affordable housing? Definitely. We need that everywhere in the community, but this is a start, and especially in an area where we really need it.
15% of the development tied to 80% AMI.
Yeah, yeah.
80% AMI would
Which
put
is-
it right about $100,000 a household.
Which is what our policy is right now.
Yep. And I mentioned this the other night in a candidate forum that I was in. There was a person that I ran into a few weeks ago I volunteer and teach a class, and she was saying it wasn't necessarily that she couldn't afford. It wasn't like she could afford, some of these exorbitant rates that are going up. But she said, I have a certain window of affordability, and those units aren't available because it's on the, from a rental perspective, because they're snapped up so quick by those that can get into that.
Right.
And she's like, where are the other ones that are like this? Where else can I get a
Right.
place that's not on the bottom end of the spectrum, but it's not on that mid even to high end? So when you look at, like in my district right now, with what's going on Rio West, there's a big, that apartment by the Charlottesville Rehabilitation Center. Rio Point's coming online. Now, Rio Point's got it right out there on their sign, luxury apartments.
They all say luxury.
But all of those developments came in and were approved and applied for before we changed the needle from they got a density bonus to do 15% of the units at 80% AMI.
Which is $100,000 a household.
So, but and that's the nature of where we're at from an income
That's
standpoint.
fair. 125,800
community.
is HUD, family
Yeah.
median household
Yeah.
income.
Yeah.
But if, and I've heard you and Keith talk about it on this show many times, we're finally seeing a lot of supply coming on that's been there kind of a glut. My concern is if we don't stay ahead of it, because when we move the needle, we're going to have to contend with this. It's the same thing I think you're talked about in the city with their inclusionary zoning. When we moved the needle to 20% at 60% AMI and then came up with our incentive package, we've still really yet to see any application come in of any size. Now, there's a couple working through the system right now that I'm really excited about, and I can't wait to see how they turn out. But that's going to be probably 6 months down the road before those, kind of get into the public process. They're working and doing pre-apps and just getting their applications in. But all of the apartments that are coming online along Berkmar between Agnerhurt and Walmart, and then Rio West, Rio Point, and then there's some buy right projects I know that are coming online that will also have kind of a townhome mixture of rentals and stuff. they will, all of those applications were in before, so at a bare minimum, they have to bring the 15% units and affordability, and will help folks like the lady I just mentioned find a place, because she said, if I could get into that rent piece and that rent parameter, then I can start maybe putting a little away so that I don't have to rent forever, and I can maybe then go save some down payment and go get into something that I can own.
In all fairness, this is why Mike Pruitt and Sally Duncan are talking about affordable housing. It is critical to this community right now. It is a hot topic. It is a hot topic because it's important, and we don't have enough housing.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. I'd love to continue the discussion here. Viewers and listeners, we're going to try to get to as many of these comments as possible. I do not think we're going to get to all these comments right now.
Do you want me to address a little bit the VDOT piece, or do you want to just let that go?
I was going to follow up with the VDOT piece.
All right.
And the concern with the folks was that the VDOT, what's the word I should use here? Renovation, reimagination of the old Ivy Road corridor?
Right.
I mean, what's the word that I should use here?
Well,
the rebuilding, the reconstructing?
Well, VDOT refers to it as a pipeline study.
Okay.
It doesn't have anything to do with burying pipes. It simply is that whole corridor, Ivy Road and Old Ivy Road, are critical for statewide traffic for VDOT.
Right.
So they have declared that a pipeline study, which means that they're studying it and will be proposing improvements in that area. Unfortunately, that pipeline study and those improvements hit at the same time that they had planned for the bridge, that resurfacing of the bridge there at Old Ivy Road, and that had to happen first before we could do anything else. And as everybody knows, Albemarle County roads, unless they're private, are maintained and paid for through VDOT, which in my opinion is a good thing, because you wouldn't want to know what your tax rate would be.
Yeah, Charlottesville City can tell you about that. Yeah.
If we were paying for all of our own. Having said that, I think it's also important, in truth in advertising, my late husband was a 41-year employee at VDOT. He was a structural bridge engineer. So I spent a lot of time in the VDOT world. But VDOT is very underfunded. People don't want to believe that, but they are underfunded statewide. So they are struggling with the same challenges around funding that we are in the county. We are all struggling with money. So some of what we see happening is we have projects that we didn't get funded this year through Smart Scale because of their funding. Their funding is also part of their struggle with funding right now is based on what they're having to deal with storms and maintenance. And the same thing that we're seeing, cleaning up of roadways. So their maintenance fund has exploded, which means that their funding for some projects has gone down.
And the General Assembly is going to have to contend with that. They have to figure out how they're going to do funding of transportation projects around the state.
We have had a gas tax. We have raised the gas tax in Virginia, I believe, once in 30 years. Now, no one wants to pay more in gas tax, but what we hear a lot of complaints about are traffic and road congestion as well. And at the end of the day, it doesn't drop like manna from the sky.
And we've had to put local dollars aside. We have a transportation leveraging program that's in our CIP. We have an excellent transportation staff. They do a good job of applying and knowing where and get creative and trying to find how to use or get projects done through the different state sources that are there. But at the end of the day, I mean, that it might even be closer to 30 million now that's in that leveraging piece. That's simply there for us to pull from, that if we have a $20 million project and we put $2 million towards it, it helps you get the other 18 from the state. So that's why it's called a leveraging program. Yeah. But if we don't do that, you don't even see the projects. I think everybody would agree that they're not seeing the projects happening at the speed they'd like to see them happen at. But if we had to really do the revenue sharing at the point where I'm worried the state's going to go, it's just like your point earlier about, all the state funding for education went away, so the locality had to pick it up. If we have to start picking it up for transportation projects too, we don't have that capacity.
That's going to be expensive. I got one comment that's a good one on the Old Ivy residence project that I want to read to you, and then and we're up against time here, but I would love, if your schedule permits, the chance to go a little bit longer because the show has been so excellent. Maybe 5 more minutes if possible.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay,
I can stay until lunch if you'll give me a sandwich.
Fantastic. We have a full bar over there.
Full bar.
That's got a
I don't
full
know.
bar.
A little early for happy hour.
I see. You
Yeah,
do have a bar.
We do have a full bar.
Oh boy.
This comment, and we have some top shelf stuff over there. This comment's coming this is from John Blair here. He says, the big problem with this project, the old Ivy Residence project, is that the property was rezoned in 1985 with a proffer that it would never have a density greater than R1 until Old Ivy Road was approved to the satisfaction of the Board of Supervisors. Therefore, this rezoning did not have to be approved as a proffer as the force of law. The BOS could have relied on that proffer and not upzone. In 2023, the BOS made the decision to obliterate that prior proffer and upzone the property. People should know that context. And then he also adds a few more sentences, and then I'll stop. He says, there hasn't been any serious improvement to Old Ivy since 1985. The BOS had the ability to deny the rezoning based on that proffer, and instead the BOS voted to upzone. Legally, the BOS could negate the proffer, but it did not have to, and the proffer gave them the ability to say no to the rezoning. His response there. Any thoughts on that at all?
Here's what I learned during the Rio Point project, which I think is similar, without the proffer point that he's trying to make. I voted against Rio Point as the Rio District Supervisor, and I wasn't against the density. I was not against that, but what I was against was the fact that there was so much density happening in there that it was creating transportation issues, and my point was the timing. I wanted to get the transportation projects done first. Well, I've learned since that vote that that's not how things work in this state.
That's right.
And what my vote against the Rio Point, because it failed initially 3-3, and then it moved to the local developer.
Voted for it.
She voted, Diantha voted for it for this reason. We can't wait for all the infrastructure ahead of time, because if you do that, you can't put everything on hold, because one of the ways you get infrastructure is because of the demand on the system that you're there. So what ended up happening was Supervisor Price changed her vote when it came back before us under a different developer to 4-2. I still voted against it the second time. But the commitment I got that evening in my loss of the vote was from the rest of the board. I got the Rio Road Corridor Study was a commitment to get that done. And two projects that weren't on the transportation list at that time were the roundabout at John Warner Parkway and the green tea that was coming out of Belvedere. Both of those projects, I have never seen projects that weren't on a transportation priorities list make it to smart scale and get funded by the state with such speed as that. And I think everybody recognized that the point was there was so much density, and the transportation issues that were going there helped us get that. So when we approved that project out there on Old Ivy Road, of course we knew that Old Ivy hadn't been. We know what the problems are with that whole area for transportation, but the fact that VDOT had identified it as a pipeline study, that negates like what we apply for. They'll put that project through. We'll get say in the design, but getting that project in place was the board saying, we'll commit to adding this density and allowing this project to move it forward here. But every single supervisor was nodding their head going, and we're going to stay on this to be able to get those improvements in place to do the road stuff that has to happen.
Infrastructure follows development. It's not the other way around. And for VDOT is not going to spend money figuring out infrastructure changes and road changes until they're approved. They used to do that decades ago, and their staffs were spending all of this time on projects that were never approved. So infrastructure, especially highways, but schools too. But because if you build the infrastructure before the projects, you end up with roads to nowhere. We have other states that have roads to nowhere, right? And it takes years and years for the development to happen. So in Virginia, infrastructure follows the approval by the governing body. That's just the way it is.
Last topic here, and you guys have, we got just about every media outlet.
I guess I should look and see some projects in Stanton and see what they're doing over there.
We got.
There you go. So John Blair.
I had to nudge him back there a little bit.
That was a zing right there from Supervisor Galloway.
John, we love you. It's
we love John. He can handle it.
We
appreciate the question.
I'll throw this to the panel here. The development area is restricted to 5%, and I've been here 25 years. You guys have been here longer than me. But in my 25 years, I have seen the appetite to expand the development area gain momentum. Mm-hmm. Now, there's still kind of that old guard in Albemarle County that does not want it to happen. But there's newer blood in Albemarle County that's pushing to do it. Neil should get some of this credit because I think he's leading the charge of expanding it. Can we talk about the likelihood of that being expanded first? And the second part, if it's not expanded, trading out other parcels of land for parcels of land in the development area that either don't have the topography, or as you mentioned, too close to the river,
Right.
or the slope that will never be developed. I think this is a great way to close the show.
Well, I would say that
Started,
we're going through the AC 44 update right now.
And let them know what AC 44
the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
So we're
it's
going through our
20-year
update.
plan, 44.
And I can tell you, as somebody that's been closely following the county's politics since 2009, that it's only been this year that conversations about the swap idea, like let's be clear what the record is. Not a single sitting supervisor has said they want to expand the development area, that they would agree to do that if a vote was put on us right now. We did agree to that like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, when we started the AC 44. Now, the swap idea,
Michael Pruitt has pretty much said he would be willing to expand the development area.
well, then maybe that was done before he was sitting with us.
Yeah.
And he's certainly politic. Maybe that's not the right word, but he's certainly papered the record with was it Rivanna Village and how
We've talked about
Right.
absolutely.
Well,
all
this
of
is
us,
the
this
swap.
is swap.
Yeah,
That's part
right.
of the
There's a
swap.
difference here.
There
Let's
is
talk
a
about
difference.
this swap.
That's
because
not an expansion.
when the swap came up, it was about, and we have a criteria now. They brought that forward a few months ago
Staff
that
did,
said, let's
yeah.
identify property that's currently rural area, but its proximity to sewer and water and some other things in that criteria could be, if this were in the development area, it'd be prime for development, and then identify the reverse, places that could revert back to the rural area. Supervisor Pruitt was very much interested
He
in that
was,
because of Ravenna
absolutely.
Village. I don't think, I have to go back and re-listen to the minutes to see if he actually said he wanted to expand the development area during that conversation. But this conversation of even the swap was not happening 2 years ago. It certainly wasn't happening 5 and 10 years ago. So the fact that it is, I think, reflects the fact that you have current supervisors that are saying, look, Diantha always reminds us, if we keep doing things the way we've always done it and expect a different result, that's wackadoodle, to use her favorite word. So we have to start thinking differently and start getting ahead. There's nothing to say that whether it's 20 years or 40 years, if the growth continues to happen, it's wise of us to do the proper planning and have the conversations of how we're going to contend with that.
And I would say that all of us have supported the 5%, 95%, because to be honest with you, that is our regulator. It regulates our growth and where we want it and where we put it. It's really been good for Albemarle County. Having said that, to continue to do it the same way and not make adjustments, if I went to a doctor who told me he was going to use the same procedure on me that he's been using for 40 years,
you got the wrong doctor.
I would go to another doctor,
Right.
right? I'm just saying that and looking at the criteria of how we might change this around the edges, because when the development area and the rural area lines were drawn all those years ago, right now we have about 50% less acreage in the development area than we had at that time because of factors that are really good. I mean, Biscuit Run took, 400 acres out of the development area.
And the protection area around the river. We don't want to
yeah.
be building right up to the river
Right.
edge.
So what we're looking at now, all these years later, is how can we make some very targeted changes, not to expand necessarily the development area or throw the baby out with the bathwater,
Sure.
right? But to get some more land that we know will never be developed, right?
You've personally, Supervisor McKeel, have gotten more open-minded with this. I remember the first time that you've come on the show with the development area, you said on the show, sitting in that seat, that you until the 5% was at capacity, we are. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, but you know what? My profession is from the medical world, and we change when we see new facts.
Right. I understand that.
I don't want somebody
Right.
that is saying, I'm going to do something the same way for 20 or 30 years that I've always done. I like to actually look at the data and the facts, and I often change my mind.
Right, and I appreciate that, and that's what I wanted to highlight. And that's why I think this election cycle is a huge election cycle, because if the cards fall a certain way, and say a Sally Duncan were to win your district, and you would have Supervisor Pruitt and Supervisor Duncan on the board, and potentially Supervisor Galloway over here. I think Supervisor Galloway is going to win his race here. Right now, I do not believe there's opposition.
I haven't heard of opposition.
In your race?
You got a month left.
Okay, so if the cards go the right way, you're looking at a third term here, then you would have 3 of 6 that are very open-minded to this.
It is interesting because I would encourage folks to look at some of the presentations that Hamilton
Lombard
of Weldon
has
Cooper
made from one. I just asked him to come to my CAC recently to present data on Albemarle County, and at that CAC meeting, he referenced very clearly several communities across the United States that were in exactly the same place we were, where they were lacking in affordable housing. Service people were living outside of the area and having to drive in. I say that we are in Aspen. Don't talk to me about getting to be in Aspen in Albemarle County. We are already Aspen.
Right.
And Hamilton was saying that it is really interesting in those communities. What has happened is, because of them not being willing to change or even tinker with what they've been doing, whole boards were thrown out, unelected, because people were fed up with lack of housing and the service people had not having places to live, teachers and firemen. So it is a dynamic that is happening across the country, because all across the country we're struggling with affordable housing.
Housing's too expensive.
And we have the expertise on the board with our staff, with the resources we have available in this community to protect the things that we value in Albemarle County.
Right.
And we can do it with this rural area development area dynamic that we have. But we also have tough issues. And if we just stand back and say, oh, we're going to make these issues compete against one another, versus leaning in and going, all right, we have these values, but we also have to solve these problems, and both have to play into that. It can't just be the development area on the development area to solve economic development and housing issues in this county. And that's just fact, in my opinion.
Right. And I don't think anyone on the Board of Supervisors, and I certainly have not heard any of the candidates so far say, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because that development area and rural area has done some really positive things for us. But to just keep doing it, maybe we do. It's time to look at doing something differently. And that switch would be, and we asked staff to come back to us with the criteria of what it might look like: water and sewer, location,
But protect,
we're protecting,
Well, but the rural area protects our water supply,
Right.
and what we have out there's in the water supply. All the folks in the rural area are on wells. The water supply that's going into the reservoirs and stuff is protected, coming through the rural area, and then being served on public water to the development area. So I get the back and forth relationship between having a strong development area and a strong rural area. It's just we've got things to contend with, and we can't do it like it was done 20 years ago.
or 40 years ago.
Or longer.
This is a great show. It's a great show. We have 3 seats on the board that are up for election. We have the Rio District. Supervisor Galloway has indicated he will pursue a 3rd term today. The Samuel Miller District has a contested election, but not until the general side of it with, was it Fred Missel?
Fred Missel.
And Scott Smith?
Scott Smith, the Republican. And then the Jack Jewett race, I think, is going to be the most closely followed of the 3 races.
I agree.
Sally Duncan and Dave Shreve, toe-to-toe. Supervisor McKeel has kindly and generously offered to sponsor a forum. Why don't we close with that, the details of the forum?
So it'll be next Wednesday, the 21st, 5:30 to 7:30. It's really 5:30 to 7, but we're trying to say 7:30 because we know there'll be a Q&A and a lot of questions and answers. It's at Journey Middle School in the Media Center, but I will say that we will have it on YouTube, and we have a podcast, and we have somebody coming to take care of all of that for us. So you don't have to just come that night. You can pick it up later as well.
Fantastic.
Yep.
We encourage you guys to stay engaged and to vote. I want to thank Diantha McKeel for 4 terms of service on the board, and I hope you will come back. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You often every time get me thinking, and I learn from you. I sincerely mean that.
7 terms on 2 boards.
4 on the Board of Supervisors.
3.
Oh, did I say 4?
Yeah.
Okay, 3
4
on
on
the
the school
person.
board.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you for that correction. Ned Galloway is going to certainly be back here as he pursues his 3rd term.
Correct.
Thank you, Supervisor Galloway, for organizing this.
Well, and I appreciate
this.
Supervisor McKeel coming on. I mean, I got to tell you, it's going to be weird not having, if I'm lucky enough, if my voters send me back for another opportunity to serve on the board and Supervisor McKeel is not there, it's going to be very, very weird for me. So I've always appreciated you and appreciate you coming on today to be able to talk about some stuff.
And we're going to snap a picture here, take a photo after
That's
the show.
fine. Oh, yes. Because I'm not on the Hall
I
of
know.
Fame wall.
We're going to get her on the Hall of Fame.
Because I didn't have a picture.
We're going to get her on the Hall of Fame wall. Judah Wickhauer behind the camera. Thank you to you, Judah. And viewers and listeners, the I Love CVille show is up at 12:30 p.m. So long, everybody.
Oh, that was fun. That was fun.
Tell us here when